Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Krickenberger. Today is Tuesday, October 9th, and this is the SIG Testing weekly meeting. This is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube, so please remember that we adhere to a code of conduct, which basically boils down to don't be a jerk. All right, so what I wanted to roll through real quickly today was a quick discussion around an initial stab I took at our charter for the SIG. And then just to call out that I signed us up for a couple follow-up items from the 112 release retrospective. This may not be all of them because I believe the rest of it is supposed to happen at the SIG release meeting today. But just to highlight some of these as things I think we should follow up on. And then Hippie's added some questions about per project PROW instances. We'll see when, we'll discuss that when we get there. So I will go ahead and share my screen and also post a link to the charter in Zoom chat here. So there's that. I will do that. Let's see here. Sorry, just trying to find my way around here. Cool. So basically, those of you who haven't served on the steering committee probably haven't seen too many of these charters. The idea here is we just walk through real quickly what is in scope for the SIG and what we consider explicitly to be out of scope for the SIG, and then if and how we deviate at all from the governance template that's called out. Governance template calls out things like what are the roles, there should at least be a chair role, there can optionally be a tech lead role, there's sub-project owners, members, there's a security contact, and then we have a spelled out procedure for how we go about creating sub-projects. I kind of don't care a ton about that, so I tried not to deviate from that as much as possible. I'm going to go back to the review view for this because I had a couple things for discussion. What I called out as in scope for us is we're interested in effective testing of Kubernetes. We do not write or troubleshoot the project's tests, but we focus on tooling that makes it easier for the community to write and run the tests and contribute, analyze, and act upon the test results. And so that covers things like project CI automation, extracting test results to a public data set, displaying the results and artifacts. Although we don't write your jobs for you, we do want to make sure that it's easy to manage hundreds of jobs. So we do configuration management of jobs, and we have some tools for that. And then tools that make it easy to do local testing of Kubernetes, things like Planter, Greenhouse. Greenhouse is Planter is what I was thinking of, not Greenhouse, sorry, and Kind. I put FetaBot as in scope for the SIG. I don't know how Feta feels about that, but I think at least the jobs that run as FetaBot are probably in the SIG. I'm explicitly calling out that we, at the moment, are in charge of keeping all of these things that we own running on a best effort basis. I'd like for that basis to be better than best effort, but we can't really do that until we've transitioned this to the CNCF, at which point I would expect there to be a more fleshed out on-call policy. But for now, just to make sure that there is an owner for it, I think it's here. In terms of cross-cutting processes, I think we overlap with SIG release, specifically in the responsibilities of the test infra role. I think when we roll out changes that impact the project as a whole, that we mostly follow this pattern of interacting with SIG contributor experience, notifying Kubernetes dev with lazy consensus, and providing a deadline. My concern here is that this sounds really squishy. There's actually no enforcement. This is just like, we're going to be responsible, quote unquote. There are no criteria for how, when, and why we're going to be responsible. I don't know if anybody here has any strong opinions on like if we should have thresholds or gates or criteria by which it's okay for us to just go ahead and roll a change out versus actually having to go through more of a formal process. And then I also think that we reserve the right to halt automation and infrastructure that we own and also disable any tests or jobs that we haven't written but are impacting the project as a whole. And then things I call out as specifically not in scope for this SIG are we not responsible for troubleshooting or writing tests or jobs that are owned by other SIGs, and we're not responsible for ongoing maintenance of the E2E test framework. This is also one I had questions over because you could argue that maybe the test framework falls under, the E2E test framework falls under the testing commons subproject, but I don't really see us doing any ongoing regular maintenance of the E2E test framework. Maybe this is something we'd want to revisit when the refactor of the framework has finished.
Aaron, to whom does the testing commons subproject belong? Which SIG?
So that does belong to this SIG.
Okay.
Tim Sinclair, can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
So I don't see, the problem is ownership, right? Like we don't have long-term maintainers for this stuff. I think it's been a problem, a historical problem for the project, right? The end-to-end test framework has kind of been a cobbling of efforts across a long period of time. And we have gone through some major refactorings, and the testing commons stuff is not necessarily meant to solve the end-to-end testing framework problem. It's meant to solve some of the generic abstract spin-up pieces for testing frameworks. So I do think we should own it. A lot of the people in this SIG that do attend this meeting are the people that have worked on it, or it's just a matter of whether or not we have resources, within the individual organizations to be able to actually execute on it. We try to help drive things in a good way when PRs come in, but we don't actually have time to devote to making it better.
An optics thing, when you said, we don't own it, or Aaron, when you said that, and this is the sub-project, I figured it must belong to SIG then, but certainly if anybody's interested in augmenting it or working on it or doing something with it, it's going to fall on the SIG to interact with them for that. But to then say that we're not responsible for the maintenance, it seems a weird position, but that all makes sense. It's a matter of resources and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. It's more like I'm trying to just call out the state of today, which is that it.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, it's fine. Like it is effectively unmaintained. So I don't know what the best way to do that is to say like we own it, but we're actively not maintaining it. We can do that, but
I think we should use it as a forcing function, like within people within the SIG. If you're attending this call, are you only including test automation, or are you actually including the tests themselves and making the framework better? So that way we deflake the actual core problems themselves.
I think we did say that we're specifically not including the actual test cases that each SIG needs to do that.
Ben's hiding.
Right.
But there's common patterns that apply, right? Like a person can write a test case that's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Use the framework in a bad way.
Yeah, and at the moment, that's not something we have the resources to control or staff, and that is something I thought that, but that did fall under the purview of the testing commons subproject, so we could call that out, but I'm not sure if anything is actively being done there, right? Like what you're describing sounds like we'd really love it if somebody went through and did a thorough audit of everybody's test cases and documented good practices and bad practices. What are the patterns to follow and what are the anti-patterns? And that is not who we are or where we are at right now.
I see what you're saying. So it's a matter of conflating E2E.test with what it contains, the ability to run it versus what you're running. So, it's
well, like the specific ones, I don't know. I would throw out that from some discussion we've had, possibly the entire framework itself is an anti-pattern, but that we don't necessarily have the staffing to, replace that.
I don't know. I view it kind of like any other thing. You use it long enough and you start to see all its problems, but forget all the solutions it provided in the first place. I don't know if you're speaking directly to Jinko or not, but I think that's getting off. I think I'm taking us off on a tangent.
That is one of them. But so to Tim's point, maybe it does make sense to say like we're the owners of this, but also call out that like we're not really doing anything with it. It's not on our roadmap. It's not on our radar. But if you are interested in doing something with it, just so you know, there's a point of contact can talk about it.
Does a SIG
with
have
us.
to be actively working on something they own?
No, they don't. And there's a bunch of SIGs that are that way too. So I think it's just a matter of saying that this is where it's housed. Go here to ask questions. I don't. It's really inconsistent with how we specify what things are actively being maintained versus what things are kind of like just exist in perpetuity.
Can you articulate that a little bit?
So like there are a bunch of sub-projects where they're just kind of exist for lack of better terms. They're not actually being maintained or updated or, code is kind of gone idle for lack of a better term.
But isn't this a case where the actual, what's in E tests, and pardon my ignorance here, I haven't looked directly, but I imagine, right, people are writing tests and tests can get promoted and whatnot, but without actually affecting the general framework that E test represents, there still can be, you still can add and remove tests from it. So that in a way it's just that the framework is not, but the binary itself, the tests that are included, that's still a consideration that's ongoing, and people address that and discuss that.
Yeah, I think it's more like we don't.
It's not to say that no one can add tests or remove tests. To say it's not maintained, that doesn't mean that.
If we say we own the E2E test framework, and then somebody comes and asks us a question about the quote unquote architecture of the E2E test framework, I'm not sure anybody here is actually qualified to answer that question, because it has evolved organically and changed so many hands that even though it has ultimately landed here, our response would be like, yeah, kind of do whatever you want, which is why I'm super thankful that a community member has stepped up and said they want to refactor the E2E test framework. And
I don't necessarily agree with that statement. I mean, a lot of people in this call, well, some of them aren't here, like Ixty's not here, but I'm here, and we helped create that monstrosity, right? Just because we had to out of necessity. Right, so we understand what's there and where the bodies are buried, but at the same time, like we don't have time to go fix it. So
I think what Aaron's saying is somebody might have dumped a few more bodies on top of the ones you buried in the first place.
That's entirely true and accurate.
Yeah, like I buried a few bodies myself, but yeah.
The vendoring question's a whole other question.
Well, I think this is an example of like, maybe we should just say like, for the time being, maybe call out that it is homed here and we would actively looking for people to participate. But this is a prime example of where we could do the job board thing or the other code contributor stuff that's been ongoing.
Okay.
Say like, we could use people to help fix these things. If you really love tests, hey, and want to fix test frameworks, come attend, and we can point you at a bunch of ongoing issues.
I mean, in the end, couldn't you end up separating the notion of the I mean, I know it's more than conformance, but separating the notion of conformance tests from every other kind, which ultimately maybe SIG testing doesn't care about so much as the results and how they're posted.
I think we're not saying we own tests ever. But like the framework, like maybe we're not working on it, but if someone did, it probably would be under this SIG.
Yeah. And
I'm reviewing all those changes. I mean, like all the changes that what's his name doing. Yeah.
Okay. So I think maybe I'll call that out as it's in scope, but like actively unmaintained.
The real quick, the point I was making very early on when I joined the SIG, I think Aaron, you mentioned, because I had the idea of this pattern for how to treat providers, and I think you kind of mentioned that, hey, well, we're not really in the business of wanting to tell the different SIGs how to do a thing. It's sort of their decision to do that, and they can maybe ask us for help, but we don't really take a super proactive approach to that because we want different ideas to come up, organically and, sort of the best of breed. And I think the E2E test binary in the framework is there for a reason, but it's there for multiple reasons, and some of those reasons ultimately could kind of get separated out into, it's on you. Like, we'll give you a place to display the results, but aside from, the broad set of tests that define conformance and some other aspects of it, is that just one of those situations where make a decision whether it's on SIG testing or not, to take that proactive approach in providing test frameworks for all the different SIGs and sub-projects. And I mean, maybe that's the broader question. I know we currently do, but
even conformance isn't actually owned by SIG testing.
Yeah, that's actually, conformance all falls under SIG architecture, even though I'm a SIG testing.
Test is ultimately the binary that's used to run it. And so to take that away and everyone do their own thing, that would be ultimately today taking away the ability to easily run conformance tests. I was just using that as an example, but that's sort of like a Kubernetes wide set of tests, where a lot of other stuff, I mean, yes, historically there's been this SIG has helped provide tooling or maintain tooling to run those for people, but like you said, Aaron, we don't really care how they do it.
Yeah. So I get your point. Like, if somebody else wants to make a different testing framework for them to write and run their tests, and it works well for them, we're happy. That's great. We don't have to actively get involved. If it works so well that it could be used by other SIGs, maybe we want to help promote that. But it's not something we would necessarily enforce. So I think Patrick raised a pretty good concrete question, though. If a vendoring or Golang version change breaks E2E test and needs work, will SIG testing find someone to fix it?
Who broke it?
There I would say, yeah, probably we would. We're definitely involved in Golang changes right now, since like we just white spaced the world for Go 111.
I mean,
I wasn't kidding when I said who broke it. Well, I mean, could it be reverted? In that case, could it be reverted and then figure out what to do?
Maybe, but I want to throw in that it might also be worth calling out that there are people in the SIG that do a lot of things that we might not necessarily want to actually put in the charter. Just because we're helping with things doesn't mean we have to like permanently sign up to say we do that.
Right. So I don't necessarily know that vendor is within scope, but I feel like we're maybe beating the horse dead at this point. Like, I'll say that E2E framework, that the E2E test framework is owned by the SIG. And I would really appreciate a thorough review from you, Tim, and I will poke Theta and Steve to make sure the chairs have had a look. But there are many active members of the SIG in this meeting right now. I would really appreciate eyes on it to make sure that it accurately, but does not accurately represents what we do, but like doesn't over specify, and that there aren't any major gaps either. So we got 10 minutes left. I wanted to move on real quick and just share what I have signed us up for as part of the 112 Retro. These were all things I put down under my name, but I'm happy to farm these off to whomever, or they may actively be worked on by other people. So I'll go bottom up. Allowing triage to look back further than a week is something I just did couple days, yesterday, I think, and I need to check back in to make sure. Looking back 2 weeks seems to be about as far as we want triage to look, otherwise the UI looks really messy. So as of right now, it looks back 2 weeks, and so I feel like this is about enough space for you to see, roughly speaking, what the cycle of each day looks like, and kind of understand if you're looking at halfway through the day or a third of the way through the day, that sort of thing. I also think we should be removing jobs that have been continuously failing for over N days, where let's call N 120 if nobody's actively fixed a job that's been failing for 120 days. I don't think anybody's paying attention to it, so I don't think it's really providing us any signal. I plan on doing that not on a one-shot basis, but by setting up a big query that will give us a continual list of jobs that are eligible to get kicked out. There were a lot of concerns over whether or not we were using the same sets of jobs for different releases. So this is about reconciling the jobs used across each release, making sure that the jobs have descriptions, making sure that the jobs are consistently named, and then reconciling these with the jobs that are on the release master blocking branch. At the moment, this is why we raised the question of whether all these conformance tests doing here on the 112 blocking branch. As of right now, there are 30 jobs on the blocking branch, which seems like an awful lot of jobs. If they're all green and passing all the time, that's great. If they're flaky, that might be a different story. So again, I would like to go back and Once we reconcile the jobs here, I plan on going back and documenting what are the criteria that a job should meet from a metrics perspective to be eligible to be on the blocking dashboards. So it's got to take no longer than this time to run. It's got to be this percent passing regardless of the commits. It's got to run at least this many times a day, that sort of thing. And more importantly, it's got to be owned by people who are willing to fix the job if it breaks. So if the job is failing for too long, we can kick it out of blocking.
And just to clarify, so when you mean kicking stuff out, you're disabling the whole job, not just the failing tests, right?
Yeah, the entire job, and I wouldn't necessarily disable it. I would just be removing it from the release blocking. So
okay.
I confused two things there. I would move it off of a release blocking dashboard, but it would still be running. It would just be someplace that is considered non-blocking from the release team's perspective. But for those jobs that have been, like there are jobs that have been literally failing for over 380 days now, those I will most likely go through and delete. I would like to make sure I give people a chance to recognize that they actually do care about that job. They just had no idea. But I'm not going to let these things hang out forever. And then the final thing is upgrade tests are pretty atrocious right now. You have no real quick way of knowing what version of Kubernetes you are upgrading from and what version of Kubernetes you are upgrading to. This isn't displayed in Kubernetes. This isn't displayed in Test Grid. We have the ability to display these things if we only parse it out. So I'm going to try and modify kubetest to parse this out. But this is definitely something that any new contributor could help with. So I threw on a help wanted label on this. Those were the things that I know were kind of a bumpy ride for 112. Does anybody have anything else that I should bring up during the retrospective today? Okay, cool. Hippie, I will hand over to you. You were asking about per project prow instances. Can you talk about that a little bit? You are on mute at the moment. Still searching. No dice?
There's some comments on the doc.
Yeah. So I think this is something I'd rather have more of a back and forth conversation with you on. Is this something you might be, let's see, the Kate's Info Working Group meeting is on a Friday, which is not good for you on your time. Would you be willing to speak to this next week, Hippie?
If you can hear me, when you
great.
shared, it all went crazy. It's pretty short. If I can go back to my notes.
Sure.
It's just trying to get a conversation going around what does it look like when we start transitioning things to the CNCF? Because right now with API Snoop, I do need to start engaging and creating some type of pipelines to fill our buckets,
Right.
With more audit logs that include what our app world is doing. And I just wanted to let's start a conversation around what if I have a CNCF CI bot on GitHub and Slack. And on GitHub, we tried, there was a skit we did last week, maybe the week before, where we interacted what happens when you create a ticket or mention to the CNCF CI bot, and it says that, well, I can't help you unless you make me an admin of your org. And then it sets up the triggers and the hooks and everything to get Prow and friends working, suggesting what to do. There was one thought, or that's what might it look like for self-service? Where's the configuration live? We have all of our stuff inside of Test Info right now, but I'm doing on some of the DNS stuff, and I'm trying to figure out, do we put that into the projects? I'm really enjoying it's a little bit of work on the DNS things. And having a subdomain right now for K8 CNCF CI and modeling through as we're setting up the infra pretending that K8 is just one of the projects, and what would it look like for all of our other projects to come along in that. That's it.
I'm not sure, like, I mean, are you looking for every project to run their own prow or just to have their own?
What makes sense? I'm not a proud complete practitioner.
We've been doing, like, we give like a SIG or a repo or something. They have a subdirectory of the config. We talk to them, some appropriate people to own the config. We set up an owner's spot, and then they just make PRs to currently test infra, but like we could move it at some point if we need to. I think the more interesting thing is going to actually be getting all of that running somewhere, and for that there's a whole lot of work that needs to happen first. I think something like having more prows is just going to be a lot of operational overhead, and like someone has to maintain that.
Yeah, I feel so. What you're talking about also kind of, I feel like is about a quarter ahead in the future based on the velocity of the Kate's Infra working group. So like we're still in the early stages there of trying to figure out what is the Google Cloud project structure we want, what are the right teams, what are the right permissions, what are the right naming schemes and such, before we even get to the point where we're running a cluster and prow on that cluster, and then how it should be structured for different projects. So if we're just still in the planning phases, I think that's something point you to how we can point you to how we're managing prow right now for Kubernetes, but I think like this is a little far ahead in the future at the moment.
And similarly, that's going to continue to go fairly slow just because there's not a lot of people on it, and most of the people that are people that are massively oversubscribed. So
yeah, like I'd love to see your help there, Hippie. It's just unfortunately we meet on Fridays, which Pacific, which isn't really great your time.
I'm willing to show up because this is important to me, and I do want to be a part. I'm just go ahead.
Yeah, even just discussing in Slack or something, I think would be fine. The meetings themselves are usually, they're not super eventful. I mean, we're getting back and discussing where we're at, but like we take notes and things. The main thing is that like a lot of people have been asking, oh, well, let's host XYZ thing on it, but then we need people to actually step up and say they're going to continue to run this thing, because like everyone that's involved right now already barely has the bandwidth to get all of the things that we already have up and running moved over.
I'm interested in trying to curate a community and a team to commit to that, and I'm just trying to figure out how to stay engaged.
I think it would be easier for us to come back around and talk to like, how should we split up prow or something. First, we have to like get prow over there, and like right now, for example, I don't even have access to any cloud resources there at all. So we're not.
Yeah. So I think we can talk with you about this offline, Hippie. I think like working on a proposal for how this would look so that you can help put together a team to run this is maybe the right next step here.
Okay.
I would suggest that we probably should stick to something closer to now where like we share a prow and just people own parts of the config for like their sub-project. Or like we allow people to run a prow, but we don't make it part of the project. Right? Like if cloud provider wants to have a prow, like sure, run a prow. It doesn't have to be owned by the infra team because the infra team already has too many things to own. Like we need a lot of people just to help own all of the stuff that already exists.
Fair.
Okay. Well, that is our time for this week. I appreciate you all showing up. And again, please take a look at our charter. I'd love to get that reviewed by the steering committee. Put it in their faces on their inaugural meeting tomorrow. All right. Talk to you all later.
Bye.
Shalom.